We've been in a series for the past couple weeks called Vision Mapping. And we've been talking about needing a vision for our life. Because we want our life to mean something. We don't want to just exist. We don't want to just go to work, come home, eat, sleep, and then go to work again. We don't want to just exist. We want our life to mean something. And for that to happen, we need a vision. And here's the thing. There's two ways to get a vision. You can come up with one on your own, right? You can say, I need a vision. So I'm going to think up a vision for myself. But here's the problem with that. That it's probably going to be very self-centered, right? It's going to revolve around you and what you're comfortable with doing and what you think you can accomplish. And it's probably not going to make much of an impact. Or you can get a vision by going to God and saying, God, give me a vision for my life. Give me a vision right now for what you want me to do, what you want me to be a part of. And here's the thing, when God gives you a vision, it's probably going to be more than you can handle. It's going to be bigger than you can imagine. But here's the thing, God designed you for a purpose. The Bible literally talks about this. It says that He designed you. He gave you the strengths and the skills and the talents that you have, and He has a purpose for your life. And so when we seek Him and say, okay, God, you made me. What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go? You have a plan for me. You have a purpose. If you've been in this room and you've been dealing with insecurities, let me tell you something. Don't listen to what the world says about you. You listen to what God says about you. And He says that you are wonderfully made. You are made for a purpose. God has something He wants to do through your life. But we have to ask Him, God, what is the vision that you have for me? God gives us a vision. We've been talking about this for the past couple weeks, and excuse me. One of the things we've learned is that when God gives us a vision, it starts by burdening our heart. He shows us something that burdens our heart. Something that we look at it and we go, this isn't how it should be. This isn't how it should be. And it bothers us. It annoys us. This isn't how it should be. And He begins to reveal that there's something I want you to do. I want you to change that situation. He gives you the desire to do something about it. He shows you that thing. This is not how it should be. Then He gives you that desire and says, I need to do something to fix this. And usually the issue is bigger than you can handle on your own. Because see, God expects you to do it with Him and His strength, not your own. So in this series, we've been talking about what to do when God gives you a vision. In the first week, we talked about focusing on getting a vision from God. Last week, we talked about what to do when that vision seems impossible. And we learned that we need to focus on God, focus on what we can do and trust God with what we can't. Trust God with the rest. You just do what you can do and you trust God with the rest. And this week, we're going to be talking about risk. Because how many of you learned in your life that without risk, there is no reward? If you have a retirement plan, you know this, right? If you want your retirement plan, if you want that money to grow, you've got to take risk, right? You've got to invest it in, and the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward, right? The riskier those stocks are, the bigger the reward. Same thing with buying a new car. You don't know if that car is going to turn out to be a lemon and have like 50 different recalls, right? You have no idea. But till you take the risk and buy the car, you're not going to be driving a new car, right? You got to take the risk. Buying a new house. You could buy the new house and the economy could crash again like it did not long ago, right? And the price could drop on your house and you could be upside down, right? But if you don't take the risk, then you don't have that new house. Risk, or without risk, there is no reward. You've got to take risk. And vision, vision is the same way. If you want to see the vision fulfilled, you've got to be willing to take the risk. You can't sit idle. You can't be just safe. You've got to take the risk. There's a young man in the Bible who reveals this so well. His name is Jonathan. And, I'm named after him, so I'm pretty special too. But I'm going to give you some background. The Israelites were going to war against the Philistines. And the Philistines had oppressed the Israelites for many years. And the Bible says the Philistines, they had, let me just make sure I get this right. They had 3,000 chariots. Okay, you guys know what chariots are, right? Their horses are drawn. It's like a little, cage, and there's a guy in there. There's actually a lot of times there's two guys in each chariot, right? So they had 3,000 of these things. These were deadly weapons in war back in those days. Okay, 3,000 of these, and they had 6,000 charioteers. In other words, the men that were inside the chariots, right? 6,000. So there's like two in each one. All right, 3,000 of these chariots. And then it says this, and they had as many warriors as the grains of sand on the seashore. Have you ever tried to count the grains of sand on the seashore? That is a big army, right? A big army. Now listen to this. This is how many men the Israelites had. They had 600 men, and they had 2 swords. Now, how many of you would like to be on the Israelites team, right? You're facing down this army. That's crazy, right? You only have 2 swords. I don't know what the other people were using, right? But they had 2 swords. Maybe they just kept trading off, right? Just, here, you fight now. I don't know. But they had 600 men. They were vastly outnumbered. But one of the things that God had spoken over the Israelites is that He would fight for them. He would fight for them. He would defeat their enemies. And they knew this. They knew this. Jonathan is the son of the king. The king is King Saul. Many of you have probably read the stories about King Saul. Jonathan is his son. And one day, Jonathan, I call it a vision, but you could say he gets an idea, but he gets a vision, right? And this is what happens. Listen, it's 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 1 through 15. This is what it says. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Jonathan was restless. I'll just give you a little bit of background. They're sitting there, and in just a minute we're going to read how Saul is sitting underneath this pomegranate tree, and he's waiting. And all the army is just sitting there waiting with Saul, King Saul. And Jonathan's getting restless. He's like, what are we doing? We're sitting here. God has promised that He's going to give us victory. I don't care how many men we have. We need to be fighting. This isn't right. This isn't how it should be. We should be taking the battle to the enemy. Let's fight. Let's do this. He's restless. He's got this vision, this idea. He's like, this is not how it should be. A vision from God will get under your skin. It's going to irritate you. You can't rest because we see how something is and we know it shouldn't be that way and we want to do something about it. That's how vision starts. God stirs us to action. And when we feel that stirring of action, we can't let fear stop us. Because that's what happened with Saul. Listen to this. In 1 Samuel chapter 14, excuse me, verses 1 through 15, it says this. Saul, well, so what's happening is Jonathan, he's freaking out. He's going, man, gosh, this is not how it should be. But now we're going to read about Saul, and this is how Saul's handling things. He said Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. Just so you know who that is, that's the priest, right? And he's wearing a vest, and the vest, basically, it was a way for God to communicate to his people. The priest would put his hand in the vest, and I believe he was pulled out a tile or something like that, and it would be whatever the tile was. If it was red, then it was no. If it was green, then it was go. Kind of a thing, right? And that's how it was. I don't know if those colors were accurate, but that's kind of the idea. Okay. And so that's what's happening. So it says here. So among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. That's the vest. And he was a son of Ichabod's brother, Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. So Saul is sitting underneath the pomegranate tree because he doesn't know what to do. He's afraid. Now think about this for a moment. He knows the same thing that Jonathan knows. He knows the same thing that every one of those Israelites know. That God has promised to fight for his people. God has promised to fight for his people. He saw what was, and he knew what should be. But instead of doing what Jonathan is doing, where he's taking those steps of faith, he's taking those risks, Saul is sitting in fear and indecision. He doesn't want to make a move. He was paralyzed with fear. The what if started. You know what I'm talking about. We all face this. The what ifs. What if God doesn't come through? I've only got 600 men and 2 swords, and this army is huge. We're going to get slaughtered. I mean, what if God doesn't do it? What if I heard wrong? What if God doesn't want me to do it this way? I think these are questions that we all ask. What if I heard wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if I made a mistake? You see, Saul wanted tangible guarantees. He wanted God to give him a sign that could not be denied. Right? He wanted God to start the miracle, and then he would jump in. Then Saul would jump in. All right, God's with us. Woohoo! Let's go. Right? He wanted a detailed, step-by-step plan. You know what I'm talking about. We do that with God all the time, right? God, you outlined it exactly how you're going to do it, and then I'll jump in, then I'll go, okay? But I got to know how this is going to work. You got to really explain it to me, God. We can't let fear and indecision paralyze us like it did Saul. Saul had fear, but Jonathan had faith. And vision always requires faith. Listen to this. 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 1 through 15. It says this. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash and the other to the south toward Gibeah. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." Think about that for a moment. What faith he has in God. Think about this for a second. He's not even taking the whole army. Okay, they already only have 600 men and 2 swords, right? He's just telling his buddy, hey, you and me, let's do it. We can take them. All right? We got this. You know what I'm saying? It's all good. You know, we're going to take these guys. I got to tell you, if I was the armor bearer, I'd be like, please assign me to somebody else, okay? Can I get on Saul's detail today? Because this is not working out. But man, Jonathan has this mountain-sized faith. And I want you to listen to this in Hebrews 11:1. This is what it says about faith. It says, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. Jonathan believed God would help them and help him and his armor bearer defeat these Philistines. He was confident even though he didn't see anything. There was no evidence. There was no physical evidence to say, hey, this is exactly how it's going to work, man. In fact, there was a lot of evidence to say this is not a good idea. But Jonathan had his eyes on God. Faith is believing without seeing. Where Saul was focused on how small his army was, Jonathan was focused on how big his God was. Saul was focused on how small his army was, but Jonathan was focused on how big his God was. He probably had all those stories from the Old Testament in his head rolling around. He was probably thinking about when Gideon had only 300 men and God totally wiped out this 300,000 man army. He was probably thinking about Samson when he took out 3,000 Philistines by himself when he destroyed the temple. He was probably thinking about Joshua and the Israelites when they attacked Jericho and how those walls were so high and there was no way they could breach them until God tore them down. He was focused on God. He was focused on what God could do, not what he could do. When you have a vision that comes from God, don't focus on what you have. Focus on how big God is. Remind yourself of all the times that God has already come through. All the things he's already done on your behalf, on others' behalf. Because vision requires faith, and faith requires risk. Jonathan proved his faith by taking great risk. Listen to this. Continuing in verse 7, it says, do all that you have in mind, his armor bearer said. Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul. What a friend, man. I'm with you in your crazy idea, man. Let's do it. Let's do this. You know, I mean, he must have had faith too, but man, either that or he was just super loyal. But either way, what a friend, right? Let's do it. Go ahead, I'm with you, heart and soul. Jonathan said, come then. We will cross over toward the men and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. Faith requires risk. Jonathan had great faith in God, but faith without action is not really faith. If you really, truly believe something, then you're going to act on that belief. Am I right? Listen to this verse. I love this verse. It says this in James chapter 2, verse 14. It says, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? You believe something, but your actions don't say that you do. I've shared, I think I've told this story before, but it's apt for this message, so I'm going to tell it again. There was this farming community, and they were experiencing a drought. And I love this story. Experiencing this drought. And they had church. And the pastor says, okay, After service, I want you to go home, eat lunch, and then we're going to meet out in the fields, and we're going to pray that God will make it rain, because we need rain for our crops. So the people got all excited. They went home, they ate their lunch, and they came back to the field. And the pastor got up and said, okay, now how many of you believe God is going to make it rain? And oh man, they were excited. Yes, God's going to do it. Oh, hallelujah. And the pastor looks out and he says, okay, how many of you brought your umbrellas? You can imagine the silence in that moment, because not many of them had, right? Because we talk a big game, right? Oh, I believe. Oh, yes. But it's not about what we can say with our lips. It's our actions that prove our faith. Jonathan believed God was going to help him defeat the Philistine army. He didn't sit and wait like his father. He took steps of faith that were progressively more and more risky. He didn't just rush in because he wanted to make sure that this was a God thing. First, let me just kind of outline what Jonathan did. First, he marched over to where the enemy was located. He was burdened with a vision. This isn't how it should be. We shouldn't be sitting here. We should be taking the battle to them. God is with us. He's big enough. Doesn't matter how many people we have. He was burdened. This is not how it should be. So he says, let's go over there. I want to check out this army. Basically, this was information gathering. Is this from God or not? This was risky. He could have been caught by the patrols, right? He and his armor bearer could have been caught. So this was risky, but it was lower risk. It was still okay. He was still able to back out and say, okay, no, this isn't God. I got it wrong. Let's go back to the army and wait. Right? This was information gathering. For you and me, when we get a vision, this is where we need to start. When God gives us a vision, we need to take steps towards the vision. Ones that will get you more information, but may be risky all the same. You need to take those low risks so that you can get that information. You know, is this of God or not? You take those steps. Then Jonathan's next step was he talked about this crazy plan with his friend. This was risky because you know what? His friend could have laughed at him. His friend could have been like, you're nuts. And then went back and told all the army, you know what he said? You know what he wanted to do? This is our prince. One day he's going to be king. We better do something, okay? Because our nation's in trouble if he ever gets to be king, right? This is crazy, right? He could have been a laughing stock. Now, they probably wouldn't have laughed in his face because that would have been, his dad would have, executed him. But they probably would have been sniggering, right, behind their mouth. Oh, there he goes. Superman, right? He's going to take on the whole army, him and his buddy, right? That's humiliating. It was risky for him to share this information with his friend. But I believe Jonathan was taking this risk to test the waters. You see, his friend was a godly man, and if he thought that Jonathan was wrong, if he thought he was nuts, then Jonathan would have to say, okay, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I am biting off more than I can chew. Maybe this really isn't what God wants for me. When you get a vision that you believe is from God, we need to share it with some godly friends. We need to get their advice. If they are in tune with God, they are going to recognize a God-inspired vision. Just like this armor bearer. He recognized that Jonathan wasn't, this idea wasn't Jonathan's alone. It was something that God was birthing in his heart. He recognized that. There's no way he would have just given his life for some crazy nutball idea that he didn't believe was of God. No, he recognized, this is something I believe God is birthing in your heart. Let's do it. Let's go. Or they can recognize that you're biting off more than you can chew, and you need to back up a little bit. You need to pause, take a breath, pray a little more. You need to share your vision with a godly friend. The next step that Jonathan was to do was one final test to be sure that God was on board. And that test was he exposed himself to the enemy. This was the riskiest move yet. But here's the thing. He still had the ability to escape. The idea here is when you get a vision that you believe is from God, take steps of faith. Take steps of faith towards that vision. Don't sit under a pomegranate tree going, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. If it's God, if you believe it's God, then start taking those steps. You don't have to commit yourself completely. Jonathan didn't. But he took steps towards that vision. And he let God confirm it for him. Yes, Jonathan, I'm with you. I am with you. Keep going. Don't wait in fear. God rewards faith. Jonathan was rewarded for his faith and the risk he took. Listen to this in 11, starting in verse 11, it says this. So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. I love that. Peekaboo, we're here. You know. Look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. So Jonathan said to his armor bearer, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about half an acre. Crazy. Then panic struck the whole army. Those in the camp and field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. Can you just imagine? 2 guys. And I think they may have only had one sword, okay? Because Jonathan and King Saul are the ones that have the swords, right? 2 guys and one sword, and they're climbing up a hill, and they take out 20 guys, and then the whole rest of the army starts to get freaked out. 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and all this huge army, and they're going, 2 guys, oh! You know, and they're wigging out. They are freaking out because God instills in them a panic. I love that. You see, God honors faith that's put to action. Faith moves God. It moves his heart. I think when he sees something like that, I think he just gets excited. He's like, oh, Jonathan, he's getting ready. He's going to charge up that mountain. Oh, I love it. I love his faith. He believes in me. He trusts me. He's willing to risk everything because he trusts in me so much. God loves that. Now let me be clear. We are not to take risk to force God into moving how we want him to move. Jonathan didn't do that. The whole time he was checking with God, testing the waters, making sure that God was on board with this. Every risk he took, there was always the option of he can back out. He can get out of this. He doesn't have to commit himself completely. But he took steps of faith, took risks towards that vision that he believed God was putting in his heart. We need to take the necessary risks that flow from the vision that God has revealed to you. Listen, all of us want to live lives that matter. All of us want to live lives that matter. We want to make a difference. But to do that, we need a vision from God. But we also need the faith to be able to take the necessary risks and step out. I don't know where you are right now. Maybe you are like Saul and you're sitting under that pomegranate tree and you're going, I don't know what to do, because God hasn't outlined it completely for you. It's freaking you out what God has been putting in your heart. And let me just challenge you, begin to take steps, like Jonathan, take steps towards that vision. You don't have to commit completely, but start taking steps in the direction of that vision and let God confirm it for you. But take risk. Don't sit there and just kind of say, I don't know. God hasn't spoken to me. He hasn't told me. He hasn't outlined it all for me. Because can I just tell you, God may be waiting for you to take that step of faith before He speaks to you. Can I tell you that happens to me all the time? This is one of those stories that I lean on throughout different times of my life. I'll think back and I'll be like, Lord, I don't want to be Saul right now. I don't want to sit in indecision and fear and go, gee, I don't know, and freak out and go, God, you got to tell me everything before I move. I want to be like Jonathan. I want to take those steps in the direction of what I believe God is putting in my heart and allow Him to speak to me and confirm, yes, you're moving in the right direction. I'm with you. Keep going. Keep going.